And so we've talked a lot about prevention, but the guy who knows a lot about it is going to take the microphone next, SUNY ESF assistant professor, and he's going to talk about environmental factors and personal protection. Dr. Brian Ledet. Doctor?
Thank you, Dan. And thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate the invite to come and talk and hanging around. Hopefully this will be an exciting presentation. We're going to get away from a lot of the data and I'm going to show pictures and talk about the tick, which is probably the main culprit here, and how we can prevent from getting sick, because you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. All right, well, thank you so much. So I'm Brian Ledet. I'm an assistant professor at SUNY ESF. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, if I can get a laser pointer, my skills in Zoom, about the environmental forces of factoring into this tick, and then prevention, what you can talk to your patients or talk to your family or do for yourself. So as Dr. Thangamani mentioned, there's a lot of ticks out there, And just as an example of some of the ticks you can encounter in the eastern and western United States, they look very different from the engorged female. I got a gray tick. I'm like, you don't have a gray tick. This is just an engorged black-legged tick, all the way to the larval stage. And they can look very, very similar to the layperson, very different to a tick expert. But it's just to know out there that there's a lot out there. And Dr. Baird gave a really good introduction on some of the stuff I'll talk about. But as we've seen in the last 2 decades, we've really seen an increase in diagnostics and identification of new tick-borne diseases. And I actually added red meat allergy here because it's not in the list. So there are a host of tick-borne diseases in New York State, and this is the list of them. I note Heartland and Bourbon virus here. I believe Heartland virus was detected, and I think there's been 1 or 2 detections of Bourbon virus, but we do have the vector for these in New York State. Importantly, in Central New York, I'll talk mostly about Central New York. The ticks you're most likely to encounter on yourself or on your patients are these 2 species of ticks, the black-legged tick, aka the deer tick, or the American dog tick. And these are the different life stages. So on the left here is the male, the female, the nymph, and the larva. And to note, larvae have 6 legs. So they grow a pair of legs when they become a nymph. And they actually don't become, you can't actually see their sex until they become adults. So they're sexually dimorphic when they're adults. Importantly, the Ixodes scapularis, the deer tick, can spread these pathogens in New York State. So Dr. Thangamani talked about microbial or multiple microbial pathogens in these ticks. So it's important to note it's not just one, but it could be many organisms. So I'm going to talk mainly about Lyme disease because that's the #1 vector-borne disease in the United States. And realistically, it falls on the tick Ixodes scapularis, but it does take a plethora to tango. It's not just the tick. It takes the bacteria, Borrelia burgdorferi. It's a spirochetal bacteria, highly motile, very, very pleasant to see under the microscope for a scientist. And then importantly, the host. So the tick must take a blood meal on host. It's an obligate parasite, and it uses a whole slew of vertebrate hosts. And it's pretty interesting to see these different hosts in nature. So first, let's talk about the tick. We're going to learn a lot about the biology of the tick, so you know what you're up against. So the adult female tick lays eggs, and those hatch into larvae. And as Dr. Polino mentioned, these larvae are not infected with Lyme disease. They're clear of Lyme disease. So that's that green line here. And here's all your little baby larvae. 2,000 to 3,000 babies are hatched. So it's a nice little family. Those babies then turn into nymphs, and those nymphs turn into adults. Now it doesn't happen automatically, right? It's not just like 10 years go by and they're teenagers, and then 20 years and they're adults moving out of the house. But ticks are hematophagous. Very, very big word, but hematophagous means they feed on blood, and this is the count. I usually get a laugh, but I know it's late in the day. And what do? So ticks actually have this organ called the hypostome. It's like a needle-like appendage in their mouth. And they have these barbed teeth that actually are like barbs in a fish hook. They actually cut into your skin, they insert into the skin, hook themselves in there, can actually excrete a cement protein that keeps them hooked in, and they start feeding. So this is the chelicerae, which are the scissors. They cut in and they insert what they call the hypostome into the skin. And they sit there and they feed on the blood. So let's talk about the disease itself. I talked about ticks. So between each life stage, the tick must take a blood meal. This is where I've interjected the mouse here. So Larva must feed on a mouse to turn into a nymph, and a nymph must feed on a mouse to turn into an adult. Now, the adult stage is really interesting. The adults don't feed on small rodents. So that's where the deer comes into play. You hear a lot about deer being implicated in Lyme disease transmission, but deer actually don't get Lyme disease. So a deer is refractory to the disease. But because the female, especially the female adult, you will never find on a mouse or a small rodent. They need medium to larger sized animals. And deer are really big animals that can feed a lot of adults. And those adults lay 2,000 to 3,000 eggs. So that's where the deer come into play. The adult female feeds on the deer, lays the eggs, and you get the whole cycle over again. Larva and nymph really preferentially feed on rodents or birds. So let's say, go back to the equation here. Let's say the adult female is sick with Lyme disease. Larvae don't get sick. So larvae are born without infection, and the larva must feed on an infected mouse to turn into infected nymphs. And this is the first stage that is likely to transmit Lyme disease to a human, or the pathogen for Lyme disease. Now, if a human's not in the picture, it's important that the nymph are infected, because then the nymph can spread the disease. Well, not in this case. The nymph can feed on an uninfected mouse, and importantly, the adults will still be infected. So once the tick has the infection, it doesn't go away until the female lays the eggs. So that's called transstadial transmission. It kind of progresses through those molting stages. However, if a nymph is infected and feeds on an uninfected mouse, it infects that mouse, and that perpetuates that cycle in nature, right? To have that cycle in nature, we need that cycle in nature because mice only live about 9 months. So we have to keep these mice infected to keep that bacteria perpetuating. So where do ticks live? I get this a lot. Ticks live a lot of different places, and I'm really going to preferentially talk about the black-legged tick because that's the one that spreads Lyme disease notoriously in the United States. Black-legged ticks really like forests, and if you've been anywhere in central New York, this is very familiar. And especially forests that are deciduous or have these broadleaf oak trees. Not so much pine needles. Actually, pine needles are actually toxic to these ticks. So you don't find a lot of ticks in conifer forests or pine forests. But you do find the black-legged tick in these really oaky forests where you have this leaf litter that is degrading. It's if you ever dig down in this leaf litter, it's like this, there's leaves on top that are new, and there's some degraded leaves, and then there's this nice topsoil. And what that does is produce an environment that is very hospitable for that tick. That tick dries out very easily, and they climb up and down. They go down into the soil where it's very moist, it's very warm, and they like living down there. It's like a little sauna, and that's like a little protection for them. Ticks survive for an extended period of time. They're not like mosquitoes for like wimps. Like they'll feed a couple times and they'll die, or house flies. But ticks live for a long time. They live up to 2 years in ideal conditions. 2 years. I mean, I have a 1-year-old. There's ticks out there that are older than my baby daughter. That's in the winter, I get the question, where do they go? And I say, well, they go into tick igloos. They don't build igloos, they're not that smart. But if you can imagine going out in central New York, even the Adirondacks, in the winter, you're walking in the snow and you step down and you crunch, right? You crunch down that little bit of ice layer, right? That forms because the ground is so warm, it melts that little bit of snow, and then it forms this ice layer. And that's how, the Eskimos keep their igloos warm. They can be warm, they can have a fire in an igloo and it's just fine. So it's that layer under the ice that is just a perfect environment for these ticks. And they sit down there and do absolutely nothing when there's snow, and they just are resting. We have to think about, I tell them, well, it's so cold, Dr. Ledet, this year. There couldn't have been ticks. I said, well, the ticks are not experiencing this environment. I don't know what these people are doing. They're going camping in this weather. They're crazy. Ticks are not, 2 meters above the ground. They're not experiencing these. They're experiencing these microclimates that we don't experience. So I tell people, whenever you see the snow melt, there is potential likelihood that ticks can emerge and come out and feed on you. So once you see the ground, there's a likelihood that ticks can come out and start feeding on you. How do ticks find their host? So they do this method or this thing called questing, kind of like Legend of Zelda if you're a little Nintendo person. 2 types of questing strategies. One is an ambush strategy, and this is what the black-legged tick utilizes. So this is not a black-legged tick. This is some type of amblyomma. And it's going up to this leaf and it's putting out its front legs, and it has sensory organs on its front legs. And it's waiting for a host to pass and then grab on and then climb up and find a nice place to eat. Then there's the hunter ticks. And if you can see this little lady right here, this is the Lone Star tick. She has the dot on her back. These hunter ticks will actually chase down their prey, and they can run about 3 meters chasing you down. So when they get to central New York, it'll be fun. I dealt with a lot of them in Louisiana. What are they searching for? They're getting a couple cues. I told them that they're censoring for organisms to come by. So looking for odors, certain odors, they're looking for CO2 that mammals and vertebrates off, when they're breathing. They're sensing animal breath, ammonia, butyric and lactic acid, which is from sweat or your muscles working. I put this picture up. This is a dead deer. Ticks are not hunting dead deer, but there is evidence that some ticks will actually go to carcasses waiting for scavengers to come and get on the scavengers that are going to scavenge on this deer. They're also sensing radiant heat. So I feel this is what ticks see. This is actually a FLIR image. And they're saying, oh, look, these animals, these warm-blooded animals are hot compared to their background. And that's what I'm going for. Vibrations. I could not find a very good picture of a deer vibrating the ground. So it has to be an elephant. But they can sense this vibration when you're walking. However, just so you know, elephants are not safe from ticks either. This is the elephant tick, Dermacentor circumglottis. So elephants even have their own ticks. Some ticks even respond to the sound of a host. Some ticks can actually hear the oscillation of cow masseter muscles when they're chewing, the cattle tick, and even barking dogs. So they'll hear, not really hear, but feel that vibration, and they'll sense down those sounds or those frequencies. And then tick-emitted pheromones are like colognes or perfumes. And this is a really good example of what a clutch of larvae looks like. So a female has laid eggs, probably down at the base of this plant. And one lone larva went up and said, hey, this is a great time to quest, and let out a pheromone and said, hey, come on, friends, let's all go up. And this is all them waiting for some animal to pass by to grab on. Now, this is an aggregation pheromone. They also have sex pheromones. So when a female is feeding or a male is feeding on an animal, they'll release pheromones and say, hey, come over here. I got an animal we're feeding on. So they're also attracting each other. Now, this life cycle is very complex. It's a 2-year life cycle, like I said, and I'm not going to really go through this, but I just want you to know that it's complex. And it takes time for the tick to get from the larval stage, the egg, all the way through all its blood meals until the fed female and then laying those eggs again. And that's going to come into play later on of why important of this 2-year life cycle. It's unlike a mosquito, who has a very quick life cycle. So I've talked about all the factors in Lyme disease, and you have the tick, you have the bacteria, you have the host. I want to mention, I'm not going to go much into it, but hosts are very different in the way they can actually feed the tick and actually infect the tick. I mentioned earlier that deer are very poor reservoirs, or don't infect the tick with Lyme disease, but they feed plenty of ticks. So green means not very good host for the spirochete. Red means really, really good host for the tick and the spirochetes. And you have everybody in between. However, I've left one big person out of this equation. That's people, right? Without people, we don't have disease. If you had a plot of land over here surrounded by fence and there was Lyme disease in that fenced area and a person never went in there, why would you care? No one would care, right? It's the person that really brings us to the table here and understanding how we can prevent us from getting infected. So where do people encounter ticks, right? That's what we're concerned. Where are we encountering ticks? I say, well, people encounter ticks where ticks are and people are. That makes sense, right? And they're like, well, that's stupid, Dr. Ledet. I'm like, but it's true, right? If you look at this trail here, where are you likely to hike? In the middle of the trail, right? Where's your kid likely to hike? Well, this edge of the trail. Your dog's likely to be on the edge of the trail, right? You're not walking here in this brush here. There's plenty of ticks over there, but that's not where you're encountering them. You're encountering them on trail edges. Even more so, the edge of your yard, right? Not in the middle of your yard where the ticks don't survive very well, so certain ticks, but on the edge of your yard where those ticks are, where you're doing some weeding, where you're brushing up against the grass, getting that edge mode. That's where you're going to encounter the ticks. Studies have shown that 70% of New York residents actually experience tick bites in their yard. So that's that area that you're really concerned with. That's where we have the most interactions. I know we all hike, but we're usually in our yard more than we hike, some of us, if we have a yard. So New York, especially over the last couple of years and last couple of decades, there's been areas of New York that haven't been suitable for ticks and infected ticks. And this is a graph. This is an older study in 2010, but you can see here we're in the Adirondacks. You can see the blue line pretty much here. Elevation, climatic conditions really don't lend itself to this tick. Western New York as well. But this is all changing. You can see from this graph, I pulled this data from the Department of Health website, going from 2008 to 2018. These are DEC regions, and you can see color-coded the rate of Lyme disease over time. And I think hopefully what you can see is that we've seen precipitous increases in Lyme disease across multiple regions of New York. If you do this rate change per 100,000, and you look at the last 10-year decade between 2008 and 2018, you can see decreases in the southern areas of New York, increases in the western and northern areas of New York. Interestingly enough, really around 2006, we saw an explosion in the tick population, or at least detection of the tick population and disease. And I'll talk about potentially why that is. I hear a lot of things. 20 years ago here, we didn't have to worry about ticks. And I was like, well, now you do. And that's important for physicians because if ticks are not there 10 years ago, they could be there now, right? You need to realize that ticks don't just stay where they stay put. Ultimately, I want to add this slide because it's not just the rural folks that need to worry about ticks. There has been some risk disparities, especially during COVID-19. Physical activity has increased, especially in urban areas. People have gone out to ticky areas, but also recent studies have shown, at least in the northeastern metropolitan areas, there's been as high risk of tick-borne disease in areas like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and New York City, comparable to the rural areas outside of those places. So you're not safe in the city either. So why are we seeing this increase? And this really interests my lab and kind of what my lab does in the environment. And Dr. Beard kind of introduced this, but I'm going to dig into deep to some of these factors. So we know that colonists did a bad thing to the United States. We came in the 1600s and basically almost killed all the deer. And while that was good for Lyme disease, it was not good for our ecosystem. So you can see by 1900, we've almost eliminated the deer population in the United States. We realized that was not a good thing, and we decided, let's bring the deer back. But with that comes problems. The other thing we did, if you look on this graph here, is we decimated the forests. And we said, we're going to take all the forests for fuel, for building. This is going to be great. We realized that was not a good thing and said, let's bring the forests back. But this is what the forest looked like prior to colonization of the United States. And you can find very few areas like this in the United States. The Adirondack Park is one of the areas. Out west, you can find some more areas. We have these virgin forests. We brought back these forests, and these are not forests. These are little fragmented lands of some trees. And they're very different from virgin forests, and I'll tell you why. First, if you look at these, and let's look at a virgin forest, which looks maybe something like this, and let's look at a fragmented forest system, and you see what we call edge habitat, the edge of the forest. Remember, I said, where do you encounter ticks? At the edge, right? You're not going in the middle of this forest unless you're a hunter. So what does increased edge habitat mean? It means more houses at the edge of a forest. So that bringing back of that forest brought back more edge, more areas for what we call human-wildlife conflict. The other thing it brought back is these forests support very different types of mammal structures. So a virgin forest has this like harmonious state of deer and predators like bobcats and gray foxes and mice and coyotes and wolves at one point in the Northeast. Fragmented forests support very different animal structures. Usually these very generalist animals that really survive around peri-urban areas, deer, mice, and coyotes. And that really skews the balance of the predator relationship and makes this perfect area for ticks to feed on mice and feed on deer and feed on mice and feed on deer and increase Lyme disease. The other thing that's happened over the last century or so is trees. No, that's not trees. I talk to people about these trees because these are beautiful trees. Palm trees or coconut trees, banana trees, and orange trees. And does anybody have one of these trees in their yard? Why not? You don't like palm trees, banana trees, and orange trees? We've seen a map like this, right? This is a growing zone map. If you're a gardener, you've looked at this, and there's only certain types of plants we can plant in upstate New York, basically driven by our climatic conditions. If you remember, ticks feed, right, on host. They spend 95% of their life off host. That means they're exposed to the environment, just like a plant is. And there's reason we can't grow oranges, coconuts, and banana trees in upstate New York. And that's because we don't have the right growing conditions for them. Now, climate change is changing our climatic, our surroundings. And maybe in 10 or 15 years, we'll have an orange tree. I don't know about that, but you will have different growing seasons as climate change changes our environment around us. And I like to relate this to the tick. Remember, the tick has a 2-year life cycle. You plant a tomato in the spring. By the end of the spring, you have tomato plants. Well, a tick is planted, and 2 years later, you have an adult tick. 95% of life is off the host, exposed to the environment. So I like to compare the seed to fruit, right? You can't grow an orange tree because you can't put a seed in the ground and expect the orange fruit to grow in upstate New York. There's areas in the Adirondacks where you can't expect a tick to go down and be able to expose to the environmental factors and grow to the fruit and establish. that's changing with climate change. So I like this seed to fruit, if you want to think about it that way. This is not a very tasty fruit, though. All right, so we talked about the background of ticks. Hopefully I introduced you about the biology of the tick, probably more than you ever needed to know, but you didn't know about these little guys. Now let's talk about prevention. So let's take a look at this cycle and try to break this cycle, right? That's what we do. We want to break the cycle. So let's try to take care of the tick, right? Let's get rid of the tick. What good is the tick? And I've never found an answer for that. I can at least say mosquitoes are pollinators, you know, but ticks, I've never found a good answer for what good are ticks. They're not a food source for anything. So it's an interesting cycle. I'm still trying to find that answer after 15 years. They give me a job. I guess that's a good thing. So there's some ways that have been marketed to control ticks. One is this tick tube. You may have heard of this. You may have seen this in the news. The theory behind this is you have a tube of a toilet paper tube filled with cotton, and on the cotton is impregnated some insecticide or a acaricide, something that kills the tick. And the little mice here, mice love cotton. They make these little beds. See the little pups in here in this bed, and they make these nice little beds. And when the mouse visits the bed, the insecticide kills the tick off the mouse, and it's like, oh, we cured ticks, right? Not so much. There's a lot of different hosts, right? And I can tell you right now, chipmunks and voles and shrews and birds, this bird's got 30 ticks on it. They don't use cotton like mice do. So if you have your yard only with mice and deer, those tick tubes might work. If not, it's not going to work. The other thing is social order for mice. Mice have a very big social order. So usually you'll find one mice that takes all the cotton and is clean of ticks, and the other mice are like, what about me? So don't get scooped into buying those tick tubes, please. All right, well, what about the deer? We talked about the deer being so important for the adult stage, and there has been some effort to control ticks on deer, and this is a four-poster bait deer station. It's a very interesting theory where the deer visit this corn-baited station. You have these paint rollers that have the same insecticides, and when the deer go up on it, they roll their neck where the ticks are, and it kills the ticks. And it has actually been shown to be somewhat effective in some areas, but it's very, very expensive. Very expensive, especially when you're going around large scale deployment of these four-poster bait stations. What about lawn sprays? Dr. Berry mentioned lawn sprays, and there are two types. There's do it yourself or commercial lawn sprays. And I love this picture because, like, don't spray your yard when your dog's playing with the thing. And you've got people coming out with high pressure sprays. There is a caveat to this. Many synthetic sprays are very, very good at killing ticks and controlling ticks. And I'm not going to tell you which ones. Maybe we can talk offline on that. And they do a very good job with a couple applications. However, they have a lot of off-target effects. So they'll kill pollinators. They'll kill other insects that you may want to have in your yard, like honeybees and those types of things. Some require these specialized equipments, these high-powered backpack sprayers or respirators. You don't want to be doing it when you're breathing this stuff in. They require multiple applications. You can't just do one spray. The minimal spray is usually a 2-spray application with the synthetics. There are some safer natural sprays that are marketed, but they degrade much quicker in the environment. The whole thing behind synthetics is a chemist went and said, how can I make this persist, right? How can I make this stay in the environment? The safer natural sprays can degrade with UV. Dr. Baird mentioned Nucotone, and that's looking really good. I'm really happy to hear that there's some potential personal applications of that because it's looking very effective, at least in some of the literature I've reviewed. And then a lot of these chemical sprays you spray in your yard are highly toxic to the aquatic environment. So there's actually a lot of laws in New York where you can't spray within 100 feet of any type of water system because it will go in there and just kill all the fish. So it's really important, if you're going to do this, you hire a professional company and you don't do it yourself unless you know what you're doing. All right, so you're probably not going to get rid of the tick if it establishes. So what about the bacteria? Let's get rid of that bacteria. If you get rid of the bacteria, you don't have to worry about anything. So there's two methods that are being developed right now. One is an edible mouse Lyme vaccine. And basically what it does is it takes a pellet and it puts on a vaccine. The mouse eats the vaccine. It clears the Borrelia in the tick. Great idea there. And then there's this genetically modified mice. I don't know if you've heard of this. They're potentially releasing these on Nantucket Island. They're modifying the mice to carry a gene that then makes them immune to Borrelia. And that has a whole other problem, right? Genetically modified organisms in the environment. There's a lot of debate on that. However, again, we go back to the idea that mice are not the only reservoir for this disease. So you're only taking out one player here potentially. And mice have very short lifespan. So there's some positives coming out, but we're really far away from clearing that that bacteria in nature. Unlike with rabies, which we do wildlife vaccination campaigns and can control the virus in nature. All right, so we're not getting rid of the bacteria. So what about the hosts? Can we get rid of the host? So deer culling, this is a controversial topic. And central New York, a lot of the counties use deer culling, and they like to say that it controls ticks and Lyme disease. And I'm here to tell you it does not. It only does it if you kill almost every deer, and that's not going to happen. So the level of control needed is so high that you're not going to see a response in the tick or the Lyme disease. Now, I'm not saying we don't have too many deer. I'm definitely pro culling or controlling of the deer population, because they offer other public health hazards like car collisions. They also eat my ornamentals, and I don't like that. They eat my tomatoes, and I definitely ate that. So there's a whole other things that we need to worry about. And then I don't know if Dr. Paulino didn't mention, but Borrelia miyamotoi he talked about. There's some evidence that these deer may be the reservoir for miyamotoi. I told you they don't get infected with Lyme, but there's some evidence that they may carry Borrelia miyamotoi, which means if an adult feeds on it and lays babies infected, there could be a potential problem. So that's definitely something that we'd love to investigate. All right, humans, let's get rid of us. We are the cause of all problems on Earth, and can we get rid of humans? We can't get rid of humans. That's against the law in many areas. But we can educate. We've got rid of humans in a lot of equations, right? And I talk about education. I'm public health background, and education is key, and that's why we're here, right? So what can you do to protect yourself, your loved ones, your grandkids, your kids? What can you tell your patients to do? I like to think of it as things like this. We've been very effective at reducing carry rates, right, in teeth because of brushing your teeth. How many people brushed their teeth this morning? Don't be embarrassed. Come on, look, we all brushed our teeth. You guys are doing great public health work. Sunscreen. How many people wear sunscreen when they go to the beach? Right, we do that. This is second nature. Wearing a seatbelt. When I was a kid, I mean, sometimes you didn't wear a seatbelt, but now it's like a religiously seatbelt. We all wear our seatbelts. This is all prevention through education. Why can't we do that with Lyme disease and tick-borne diseases, right? We've been effective in very, very different ways. Now, some of it's through policy, and we know that's hard, like seatbelt laws, but no one charges you if you don't brush your teeth, right, or wear sunscreen. So what can you do to prevent tick-borne diseases? So some of the easy things you can do is wear proper clothing when you're out hiking. I like to wear long pants that are light in color, because as I mentioned earlier, most of these ticks are attaching onto you. When you find them on your head or your armpit, they've climbed all the way up there. So they've had a lot of time to climb up you. And if they can't get under your clothes, they're climbing on top of your clothes, and you're likely to see them and just brush them off. So you tuck your pants into your socks, so they climb up. You tuck your shirt in, so they're climbing up, and the only way they can get in is through your neck or through your arms. And then you just kind of look down when you're walking around. Personal care side. So actually using measures to repel the tick or kill the tick. So there's a couple different things out there. I'm not going to promote any product. I'll promote the not any brand name product, but I'll promote what's inside of it. So 20% DEET or picaridin is good for skin. There is a really great permethrin. If you've heard of permethrin, it is highly effective for your clothes. Do not spray it on your skin. Once you spray your clothes, it can go through some washes. This actually kills the tick when they come into contact with it. I use this on my shoes. I use this on my socks that I use outside. I use it on my pants. For my kids, we don't want kids coming into contact with chemicals, but I'll spray my kid's shoes with this all day long because he's wearing socks, right? And that's a great start right there. And then if you're interested, you can go to EPA website. I recommend any EPA proven product. There's a lot of natural products out there, and some of them have been vetted by the EPA. So you can select what insects you want to repel, how long, what you want. This is a great website for a good start. Now I have to mention here, because I know Anne is like going, what about cats, Brian? Permethrin is very toxic to cats right out of the box, right out of the can here. So you don't want your cats outside when you're spraying this around. But once it binds to the clothing, it is completely safe, even if it gets wet again. So once it binds, it goes through a chemical alteration. It's completely safe. But just keep your cats away when you're initially spraying your clothes. All right, and then Dr. Barrett mentioned tick checks and showers. So this has been highly effective in all the literature. If people are checking for ticks after being outdoors or in a tick area, they're reducing their tick bite risks and their Lyme disease, their acquisition of Lyme disease. Take your clothes off. I know every mole on my body, so when I see something weird, I'm like, that's not a mole, that's a tick. And just look in the mirror. Have your loved ones look on you. Shower. You can rinse off any tick that's not attached. Placing your clothes in a hot dryer for 15 to 20 minutes will kill any ticks that are on your clothing. And these are some of the ticky areas. I mean, pretty much everywhere, but a lot of those indiscriminate areas are very ticky. And then around the home, Dr. Baird mentioned, this is on the CDC website. You can make your home not safe, but you can make your home less conducive to tick populations. And what I like to tell people is a lot of these things may not work singularly, but all together, you can make a tick-free area or tick-low zone, and no-go zones. So something like putting a mulch bed between your yard and the trees is a visual marker for people to go, don't go past that, your kids. You know, you say, don't go in the forest, don't go past that mulch area. Okay, mommy and daddy, that's the no-go zone. Keeping wood piles away from your house where mice like to hang out, keeping your lawn mowed, having a lot of sun, you know, keeping stuff trimmed so ticks dry out if they do fall off in your yard. You can have ticks in the middle of your yard. There's no doubt my kid got one on him, but they will die more quickly if there's not cover for them. Tick removal, I get this question a lot and no one's actually talked about it. What do you do if you have a tick on you? So I tell people, don't use any of those, don't put a match to it or petroleum jelly or, you know, some voodoo seance. Just take a fine pair of tweezers. My brother-in-law called me the other day freaking out he had a tick on him, and I had to watch him take the tick off in a video. I'm like, what are you doing, man? Like, I crushed the tick. I'm like, you're going to be fine. He actually sent it to Sarah Vonen's lab from Virginia, and it was negative. So thank you, Sarah Vonen. But you take the small pair of tweezers just at the base of the skin and just pull straight up, and that tick will come out. Sometimes the head will be in there. Don't worry about it. Your immune system will knock that hypostome out or the mouth parts out. Save the tick. I tell people, send it to Dr. Thangamani's lab. Use it as evidence for the clinician to help diagnose you. Monitor for signs of tick-borne diseases. Call your doctor if you develop symptoms. We have our website, which has some really great vetted information that we vet as scientists. And then with that, I'll leave you with any questions from my two little babies. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to talk about ticks.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. I have an odd question, but I'm just curious.
There's no odd questions.
Okay. How often does a tick feed? Is it once per cycle?
Yeah,
or
so the larva takes one meal, it turns into a nymph, that takes a meal and turns into adult. Now with the black-legged tick, it's important to note that the males rarely feed. They're there to mate and die. The female feeds and lays eggs, so the female needs that blood meal for eggs. Yep. 3 blood meals, yes, if you're a female, 1 extra meal.
Yeah.
So Brian, I still don't get this, and I was asking Jonah about it too. I know when you're saying the edges, and I've
Right.
been reading that and all that, but you know, say you mow your lawn a little higher. So why is it ticks can't be there?
So if you think about the grass, like go to the blade of grass and think about the soil beneath that grass. It's very tight, right? Whereas in a deciduous forest, it's this loose soil that's degrading. Harder for a tick to penetrate the soil next to your grass and be more exposed to the elements than in a forest where it can get underneath leaf litter and be protected. Not to say you can't have ticks in your yard. You can totally have ticks in your yard. And we talked about the longhorn tick. That tick is notorious for being in yards. So it's the black-legged tick will eventually die in the yard faster than it will when it has cover like leaf litter.
Yes, doctor to doctor now.
Oh no, the ringer question here. No. This is a planted question.
So just for clarification purposes, you mentioned the permethrin. I have a lot of patients who are like, oh yeah, I go outside, just spray myself with some permethrin. We're like, no. You want to treat your clothing, let it air dry, and then you can use it.
Certainly, do not spray yourself with permethrin. That's not an ideal thing.
Other questions for Dr. Ledet? Yes.
I know. I was wondering if we could bring attention to the chat box on Zoom.
And what would you like me to say about the chat box?
Let me see.
Open it up.
Oh, yeah.